having fun. Now, our world is not unfamiliar with the 64mm Burr grinder. And today, we have another one on the market. This is the Barsetto Bag E6. It's kind of a name. I'm just gonna call it the Bag. So I've had this grinder on my bar for quite some time now, and I've come to know it pretty well. We've gone on a couple dates. We got him to quit smoking. That was a bit of a problem. I'm gonna show you the specs right here. Take a second, look at them. I'll give you a second chance. Of course, it's 64mm Burr grinder, brushless DC motor, has anti-static plasma, great. Weighted scale, kind of cool. Also has variable RPM, fantastic. And it is stepped. Oh, and it is an auger-driven, vertically mounted burr system. So starting right off with the actual feel and look, when you first open and use this grinder, it is completely almost made of metal. There is, however, a bit of plastic on the knob, on this front plate, and on the back plate, which I think is an interesting thing because I really appreciate that it's made of metal. But one of the main places you interact with is plastic. So it's not the best feel in the world, but it's pretty up there as far as build quality goes. As far as the fingers go, I kind of want to feel something on this knob. Stop it. Otherwise, I really like the material. It does have this very interesting architecture look to it on the side. I think it kind of looks like the grill grate on the Meticulous machine. This does come in two different colors. It comes in the all black or the pearl. I personally think the pearl is prettier. That I got the black because most of my equipment is either white or black and not really pearl, but it does look really pretty on the counters I've seen it on. It does not have any bellows. It has simply a little chute right here that does come off and attach, but it has a gasket so it stays firm as long as you don't pull on it like I did. First, oh God. Another thing that I think is a pro of this grinder is it is indeed a variable RPM grinder. We're gonna start seeing a trend of these in our industry now as they become the norm. They've already kind of become the norm for the most part. But this grinder does indeed change the RPM from 500 all the way to 1500 if that's what you want. And I actually really like that the variable speed button is a button. This is something that I really wanted to see on the Time War grinders because it didn't make sense to put your hand to the back. And you can see the variable RPM using the tiny little interface display on the front. This will show you RPMs between 5 to 15, which represents 500 all the way to 1500 rotations per minute. I need water. Stay hydrated. Another thing that I think is a pro of this grinder is it comes with a scale. This operates as your catch cup and the scale to weigh the output from your grinder. Or I guess you could weigh the input before you put it in the grinder as well. The scale is interactive. You can tear it. It also says hello to you. It's a bit delayed. There's always caveats. It feels a little strange because of course there's a scale that's floating in here. Feels strange in the hand when you're holding it. It just feels like something's not quite right. I also wonder how much damage that would do over time. So you're picking it up and putting it down all the time, but it hasn't broke on me or anything. I just don't love the feeling of it. It's just a personal take, not my favorite. It does, however, come with an attachment for your portafilter, which is great if you're trying to dose. Now, the accuracy of this scale is very interesting because it is mostly accurate. It can get off a little bit here and there. The only problem is it has a very long delay if you happen to be putting in things slowly. I'll show you, for example, using some floor beans. And if you're not already familiar, floor beans are just beans that I have on my floor. There are a lot of them. So let's take this scale, for example, and we're gonna put in one floor bean. It doesn't really read anything. It's fine, kind of expected. A floor bean only weighs about 0.1 gram at a time. But let's put in 2 floor beans, or 3, or 4 floor beans, or let's put in 10 floor beans one at a time. And we're just gonna keep going all the way to maybe 17, 18, and then, hello, we do see a change in the scale, but it takes quite a bit if it's not hitting with at least 1 gram of impact. If I put those floor beans in there, it's not gonna weigh it until it gets to a certain threshold. Kind of quirky and maybe not the best quality scale in the world. That being said, it doesn't inhibit you from grinding, and it eventually will show you the number, but it's just not the quickest, most accurate scale in the world. Now, that's all fine. It still works. It's a scale, and you're gonna use it. However, there's one last thing about this before we move on, and what is arguably the biggest sin on this grinder. This little bit on the back where you plug it in, I don't even know what that is. It is not a micro USB. It is not a USB-C. This is what it looks like. This is the cord that attaches, and then it magnetically attaches right there. But honestly, this Doesn't even bother me. You can have whatever cord you want. I don't think that messes with my day-to-day. Just makes the cord harder to replace. What really gets me, and is so strange, is it doesn't plug into anything. It doesn't come with a brick, and it doesn't have an input on the actual grinder, which seems like a big missed opportunity, I think. It's a grinder, and it's a piece of the grinder. They should be cohesive. And if they're not gonna be cohesive, then they should be more accessible. But again, it's not gonna ruin your coffee experience. It's just cumbersome. A little bit foreshadowed in the intro, one of the coolest things about this grinder is your ability to get into the actual burr chamber like it's nothing. Like literally, I'm already there. And if I want to, I can clean this now. I'm done. And the retention's not bad while I have you here, because as you can kind of see it right here, it does have a little bit, as much as a grinder normally does, but it is vertically mounted. There's a little bit of spray back that goes into this where the auger lives, because there's nothing really pushing it out. So when it's grinding beans and they're flying back in that direction, why would it leave? So it's not no retention, but it is mostly no retention. That being said, there are no bellows, and it doesn't have anything on top if you ever did get something stuck. Or you could use one of those blowing out tools like I did in the intro, and you could right from the top. That would work as well. And I find it a uniquely easy grinder to clean, so I'm not complaining about it. I think it's super cool that you're able to get in super quick. It's almost a flex to some degree. And if you want to put it back, you just put it right back in place. And you hold this little piece right here, back into this little dent. You can even do it by feel, and it'll let you lock it back in. So I'm looking at you right now. I'm not looking at the grinder, and we're in. It snaps back in. It just feels really satisfying to open this and then like casually put it back. And as far as the coffee taste goes, these burrs actually do quite a good job. They do remind me very similar to the 64S Time War grinder burrs. So you're not gonna get as much clarity as say a unimodal burr that you get from SSP, but if you wanna do, you could put them in there. It makes good coffee. So if that's what you're looking for, it does do that. And I don't think you're gonna wanna really buy more burrs after buying this, because it is not cheap for a grinder. Now the next thing may or may not be a con for you, but the grinder is stepped, which is gonna limit a little bit how much you can dial in your espresso. It's gonna shorten that range essentially, because you can't really go in those in-betweens. I did find the espresso was a little bit finicky because there's not a lot of options when it comes to these clicks. You can absolutely dial espresso in on this, but you don't have the world of range. You have about 10 or so numbers of range. If you're making drip coffee, this is of course fantastic, because you might want to set that dial and keep it there while you brew your coffee and only make incremental changes. Kind of same for espresso, but when it comes to espresso, as you might already know, you definitely want the nuances in between. When I got it, it did not go fine enough for espresso, which wasn't the worst thing in the world, but it also on the very coarse setting was too coarse for anything I would ever make, even cold brew. It's pretty easy to get in there and fix, but you do have to fix it if you got it and it wasn't perfectly or even kind of close zeroed out on your grinder. Last thing about a pro of this grinder is it basically has everything you're looking for in a grinder. It has anti-static, variable RPM, a strong motor, it's brushless DC, it's vertically mounted, it does have steps, which is a little annoying. I do think, however, if this grinder maybe came out a year and a half earlier than it is right now, that it would have gotten insane reception, because so far it checks every box. And finally, we've come to the end where I have one more thing I want to talk about, and that's the price. It is $1,000 US right now. I think that is quite expensive, and I'm not sure if you can even get it right now from Barsetto. You can find it on AliExpress. For what it has, I think you are getting the value up until a point. And I feel like $1,000 nowadays for a 64mm Burr grinder that has all the bells and whistles is fair-ish. I think it's just a little more than people are willing to pay. $1,000 plus shipping, and then you want to buy burrs on top, it starts to get really pricey. But if it's what you want and you like all the things that it does, I do think getting this would prevent you from buying a grinder for quite a long time, unless you get grinder FOMO. It does all the things that we want a grinder to do. In fact, it does a few more things than are normally expected of grinders. So, does it make good coffee? The answer is yes. Is it fun to use? Moderately. There's a few quirks about it I don't think are enjoyable, but it is easy to use. All in all, if I had to rate this grinder, I would give it a 7 out of 10, maybe a 7.5 out of 10. I try not to rate things, but I think that's a fair rating. Had it come out 2 years ago, we'd probably given it an 8.5 out of 10, minus some of its character flaws on the outside. There's so many nuances and it's different for everybody. Maybe this is your 10 out of 10. But while you're deciding on those thoughts as heavy as a crock pot, go ahead and click on this video right here and we can keep this party going. Now listen, the raccoons do not dance at midnight and the cows don't come home until all the hay's been eaten. Cheers, you dirty scumbags.